Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to begin by just acknowledging that today we are, at least I am, here on the traditional unceded territory of the Okanagan Nation and their people, and it's a beautiful sunny afternoon here in Kelowna. And I also want to acknowledge that you might be joining us from near and far, and I want to recognize the traditional owners, past and present, of those lands as well. So my name is Joan Batorf, and I am a professor in the School of Nursing and director of the Institute for Healthy Living and Chronic Disease Prevention. And I want to welcome all of our new webinar guests and some of the guests I know who've been with us over the years and joined sessions with us in the past. So it's lovely to welcome you back. This is our 8th annual Okanagan Embrace Aging Month, and we're delighted to be co-hosting this with the Institute for Healthy Living and Chronic Disease Prevention at UBC Okanagan, Interior Savings and Credit Union, and Interior Health. We launched Embrace Aging some 8 years ago to celebrate and raise awareness about positive aging. And once again, we've organized a whole wide range of educational opportunities and events during the month of March. COVID hasn't held us back. We have over 30 events this year, and delighted that they're really designed for everybody, young and old. And they focus on a variety of topics related to healthy aging and ways to improve our quality of life among seniors, but also family members as well. Our goal is really to inspire everyone to embrace healthy aging and be involved in their communities. You will notice that there's a closed captioning box on the screen that is typing out the words as we speak. And that can be moved to your preferred location on your screen, or you can turn it off by using the live transcript button on your menu bar. So we'll leave that up to you. There will be an opportunity to type in comments and questions in the chat box, so I'd encourage you to do that as we go along. We'll certainly read those out to our speakers at the end. But if you think of things along the way, by all means, add them to the chat box. So our event today is actually brought to you by the Institute for Healthy Living and Chronic Disease Prevention here at UBC Okanagan in Kelowna. And the session is on building a Mason bee home. And our speakers are Dr. Nancy Holmes from the Faculty of Creative and Critical Studies here on our campus, and Jen Gardner from Kelowna Museums. So welcome, Nancy and Jen. And I'm really looking forward to this presentation, as I'm sure our participants are as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this and to speak to you today. I am Jen Garner, head of programming here at Kelowna Museums, and I'm in the museum right now. I'm in the Okanagan Heritage Museum. I'm down in the basement in the classroom. And our museum does sit on the traditional unceded territory of the Syilx people. And I feel very lucky and honored in my role here at the museum that I have been able to do a lot of learning with our Syilx elders and partners and friends. And I'm able to share what I've learned with many visitors, both virtually and in person at the museum. Now, before I jump into bees, I thought it would be kind of neat because we have a really neat classroom here at the museum that a lot of people don't get to see. So I'm just going to do a little spin around of my screen just so you can see where I am. Okay. So you see, it's a very fun space that we have here for learning. Now, our topic today is making mason bee homes. And so I'm going to do a little bit of a warm up with you and get us thinking about bees and pollinators here in the Okanagan. The Okanagan Valley is the most biodiverse region in all of Canada. And I was pretty blown away when I first heard this. And then I learned a little bit more and I thought, actually, that makes a lot of sense because we have high mountains, we have a big, deep lake, we have wetlands, we even have desert. And so with that biodiversity, well, let's talk about the bees. So first, I would like everybody to take about 5 or 10 seconds and just picture a bee in your mind. Okay, I'm going to make a couple guesses on what some of you might have pictured as far as a bee. Many of you might have pictured a flying insect with black and yellow stripes that pollinates and comes back to its hive to make honey. That's what a lot of us think about when we think about bees. The honeybee is one kind of bee. So let's imagine that this jubjub represents honeybees, one kind of bee. Now, how many different kinds of bees do you think we have here in the Okanagan Valley? So let's see, do we think it's about 50, more or less? Usually I've got a class in front of me and I can do like thumbs up, thumbs down. It's a lot more than 50. Here we go. The Okanagan Valley has more than 350 different kinds of bees. So when I said that we were very biodiverse here, I meant it. And remember, the honeybee is just one of those. Now, let's think about where bees live. So I have some pictures to show you. And yeah, normally I would do like a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing, but let's all play along at home. The game is very simple. Is it a bee home or is it not a bee home? So let's have a look at the first picture. That one's really recognizable to most of us. It's definitely a bee home, honeybees. How about this one? Is it a bee home or is it not a bee home? A lot of the times we see something like this and we think ants. This is a bee home. These are made from mining bees. And I actually have a real example here to show you. So here it's just kind of dried mud, but you can see the holes and you can see the tunnels, which is really neat. Okay, next one. Is it a bee home or not a bee home? It's a bee home. Mason bees made these marks in the earth. Okay, I've got a couple more to show you. Is it a bee home or not a bee home? Definitely a bee home. This is for mason bees, and this is going to be very recognizable to you pretty soon. How about, is it a bee home or not a bee home? It's a bee home. Bumblebees. And our very last one, is it a bee home or is it not a bee home? Not a bee home. Does anybody recognize it? It's actually the Golden Girls house, if you remember that show. Yeah, anyway. So bees live not just in beehives, not just in those honeycomb formations that we are used to when we see pictures of honeybees or honeybees. Many of the native bees here live actually down on the ground. And just before I pass it along to our next speaker, I had a couple of specimens from the museum to show you. So let's start with a good old bumblebee. So I'm going to try to get a good angle here. Now, what I really like about this particular specimen is that look at that tongue. Look at that proboscis sticking way out. How cool. And of course, the bumblebees, we have lots of different kinds of bumblebees. They're the big, round, fuzzy ones. And here, again, it sometimes takes me a second to get the right angle here on the camera. So it looks like a fly. You might see one and think it's a fly, but it's actually a green sweat bee. There we go. And now that we're kind of warmed up and we're thinking all about bees, I happily pass it over to Nancy Holmes to talk to us about making mason bee homes.
Great, thanks, Jen. That's always great, especially the jujube, bottle is always such a great way to visualize how many different kinds of bees there are. So I'm just going to, Jaquetta, I'm assuming I can share a screen here. So I will just see if I can get this going. Okay. So here we are. Build a mason bee home. That's what we're going to talk about today. The bee that's on your left-hand side is a mason bee, a little black bee, and that's what we'll talk about first. So mason bees, they are also known as mason bees. They're also known as blue orchard bees, and their Latin name is Osmia lignaria. Isn't this a gorgeous picture? Look at that bee. Isn't it just gorgeous with its beautiful furry body? The Insalian name for mason bee, I cannot pronounce it, even though I went to the museum with Jen and her team and took the Insalian language course. I'm not going to pronounce this properly, but it goes something like ish, ish, tulash. And it means the bee that flies low to the ground. So quick bee facts. I'm going to just to follow on with Jen a little bit. Pollinators, super important. 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat, thanks to a bee, or to pollinators in general. And bees are by far the most efficient pollinators in the world. They're 20 to 30 times more efficient than any other kind of pollinator, whether it's a hummingbird, a butterfly, wasps, beetles, all those other kinds of insects that pollinate. And bats, of course, do a little bit as well. Just again, following up what Jen said, there are 20,000 species of bees in the world. In Canada, we have over 900, and now the number is over 400 in the Okanagan. Almost everything you know about bees is probably what you know about honeybees. And, I was like Jen, whenever I give talks to kids, I ask them, what do you know about bees? It's the queen, it's the hive, it's the honey, they sting. Kids always say they sting, etc. But as I point out to them, you know about one species of bee. There are 19,999 other species of bees. And almost all of that is not true of those other species of bees. For example, about 80% of bees live in the ground. Most bees are solitary. They don't live in big swarms or hives or groups, and very few of them make honey for us. There are a couple of other bees besides honeybees that make a little bit of honey, but that's very rare in the bee world. And another really important thing to think about with bees right now is that they're really suffering from diseases and from climate change. And native bees' homes are being destroyed at an unprecedented rate. And the thing about native bees, like mason bees, is that nobody's looking after them. Nobody's caring for them, managing them, unlike honeybees. So just a reminder that bees and insects are really in trouble. Some of you may be old enough to remember going for long drives in the country back in the 60s and 70s. Every time you stopped at a gas station, you'd have to scrape your windshield off because there'd be so much yellow goop on it. That just doesn't happen anymore. Why? Because about 75% of flying insects in the world, well, in the Northern Hemisphere in particular, have disappeared in the past 20 to 25 years. That is absolutely shocking. The rate of insect extinction is 8 times faster than any other animal species. The environmental writer George Monbiot coined this word. We're living in a time of insectageddon. We have so slaughtered insects, and you know what? We're going to pay for it. Why is this happening? Well, native bees are experiencing all the threats that honeybees are facing. And honeybees, you may have heard about colony collapse disorder. This is a syndrome that honeybees are experiencing on farms, and it seems to be a combination of diseases like mites, parasites, funguses, etc., as well as high pesticide loads. And the pesticides actually, they don't just kill insects, they also impair their cognitive abilities. So bees can't fly as far, they can't communicate to the other members of the hive where the nectar is. So it's really causing terrible stresses on honeybees. All the native bees are experiencing the same thing. They're experiencing pesticides, they're experiencing diseases as well. But they also are experiencing habitat losses. As Jen mentioned, most bees live in the ground. Well, we are paving over the ground. We are putting agricultural land on the ground. We are bulldozing it up. We're plowing it over. We're clear cutting. All of that, every time we do that, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of bees lose their home. Climate change is really affecting native bees as well. You can see this with things like flowering times are changing. I mean, the spring is crazy, as was last spring. And then there's lots of invasive species competition. And sadly, the honeybee is an invasive species. It's not native to North America. And so it's out competing at times native bees. So lots of stresses on bees. And as I say, bees make most of the food we eat. All the good food, I always tell the kids, all the yummy food is what bees eat. Bees help us make the chocolate and the strawberries and the blueberries. Actually, I think chocolate and coffee are pollinated by other insects. And cows, of course, eat pollinated alfalfa and clover. So why are bees such great pollinators? Because lots of other insects pollinate, but only bees are made for pollination. Bees evolved at the same time as flowering plants, and bees evolved to have body parts that were made for carrying pollen. They have hairy bodies, so the pollen sticks to them, and they'll also have little strange parts of their body that are meant for collecting pollen. So mason bees, the bees we're going to look at today, they're called hairy belly bees. Their bellies are very hairy, and what the bee does is it gathers the pollen and pats it onto its stomach. And they carry it on their bellies. You can see the bee on the left here, this big bright yellow thing, that's a chunk of pollen. And the bee on the right, you can again see the little bits and bits of pollen stuck to the fur on the back of the belly. Honeybees and bumblebees carry them under their armpits, pollen under their armpits. And other bees like mining bees pack pollen onto their legs. So bees have all these different mechanisms for pollen carrying. A really important thing about mason bees and why they're so cool is that they are super pollinators. They're like that's their superpower. They are amazing pollinators. One mason bee can do the work of 200 honeybees. Females visit, hundreds and hundreds, a couple thousand blossoms every day. These are all pictures of mason bees, and you'll notice that they all kind of look like flies. So let's talk a little bit about them. They've got a black body with a little iridescent blue sheen. They're often mistaken for a fly. They actually work alone. Each female works alone, collecting pollen for her own eggs. But they nest in groups, so they hang out together in a condo, essentially. They don't sting you. You can have a mason bee on your finger; it won't sting you. They only travel about 400 feet in their whole life. It's not a very big range, unlike a honeybee, which can go up to 2 kilometers. They nest in cavities and tubes, and they only live for about 8 to 10 weeks, from mid-March to about early June. And then essentially it's a hibernation process for the rest of the year. So they're in trouble, like all native bees. What can we do to help these creatures? Well, I think we can build a mason bee home. Mason bee homes are really easy to build. So you might want to get out your milk carton, your scissors, your paper, your tape, your pencil, and I'm going to maybe show you how to make one. Before we do, start gathering your stuff together, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit of what's in the tubes and why we're doing it. Oh, this is my instructions. I'll have to come back to those, I guess. Why are we making these kinds of houses? Well, in the spring, the female's going to lay her eggs in those tubes, and then she collects a bunch of pollen and she stuffs it around the egg, and then she builds a little wall. And then she lays another egg, stuffs it full of pollen, builds another wall. So the whole tube ends up being filled up. You can see in the bottom left here. That's what it looks like inside the tube. The tubes have to be about 7 inches long, 7 inches about this big, because the female eggs are planted in the back. She lays her female eggs in the back, and she puts her male eggs in the front. So if your tubes are too short, you'll get no males, and therefore you won't get any fertilization. So it's really important, that 7-inch length. So here's some examples of what mason bees look like inside. You can see the pollen in the egg through the tube, and then from the outside, they get all plugged up with a little plug of mud when they're full. What happens is that the larvae hatch in the eggs, they eat the pollen, and they develop, and then they make themselves a little cocoon. And in that cocoon, the mason bee develops over the winter, over several months. So these are the cocoons. If you like to keep mason bees, which I do, these are my mason bees, these pictures, you can bring your mason bee house inside in the summer and the fall. And then in the fall, I wash my cocoons and I put them in the fridge over the winter, which my son and husband thinks kind of weird. But they sit there all winter. And then I let them go in the spring. I take them out in boxes and let them hatch. They come out of their cocoons when the flowers first bloom, and the whole magical cycle happens all over again. When you make your house, you're going to put it outside. You fix it firmly on a fence or a wall. East facing is the best. East morning sun, afternoon shade, near lots of spring flowers. And you have to keep some muddy dirt nearby because they fill it up. Okay, let's see if I can go back a bit here to our instructions. And then okay. So what we're going to do, I'm going to move my camera over here. See if I can get, now I might stop sharing here for a sec. All right, here we are. So here's my stuff. What we're going to do is you're going to take your carton and you're going to cut it so that it is about 8 inches on the top and about 7.5 inches on the bottom. And I put it sort of slanted like this. So there's a little overhang because we're going to put the tubes inside. And when you put it out on your fence or your wall, it will have this nice little overhang here. So I'll give you some time to do that. And meanwhile, I'll just show you. I actually have bought a house as well that I have out in my yard. And I got this from Buckerfields. And it's a nice little house where you can actually slide open this door and see the cocoons and the eggs and the pollen as they get filled up. So it's kind of a fun watching one. So cut out your milk carton. Milk cartons are great. You can only use them 1 year. You have to make a new one every year, but they're plasticized, right? So it keeps them very nice and dry. And it has a natural back on it. You have to have a back on these things. The mason bees don't want any light coming in the back. And they're about the right size. You can see how my commercial one is almost the same size. Right? So I see there's a chat. So you want to make sure that the bottom is about 7.5 inches. I should maybe turn this around. I don't know if you can see this. I don't know if you can see my so the bottom should be about 7.5 inches, and then cut it at a bit of a slant. And so the top has a bit of an overhang. In mine, it's about 8 inches. So it's not very much. It's only like 1/2 inch to 1 inch overhang, but it's certainly enough when it's on the wall to prevent the rain from going inside and soaking. You know, we're lucky in the Okanagan, we don't have a lot of rain here in the summer, but when we do, it's often kind of a stormy rain. So it's nice to have a bit of protection for them. Now, the secret, of course, is this 7-inch tube, because as I said, the males are in the front. So what happens in the spring is that the males hatch first. They fly out and they kind of hover around the house. They hang out, wait. The females hatch and then come out second, and the males, jump on them and woohoo, have their good time, do their fertilization bit. And then the males go off and do absolutely nothing for the rest of their lives. They just hang out and they have fun in the flowers and drinking the nectar with their buddies. But the females, of course, spend their entire rest of their lives working, laying the eggs, collecting the pollen, leaving the pollen with the eggs, building the little walls in the tube with the mud, and just generally working themselves to death. All this gender stuff is kind of interesting, isn't it? So that's what you'll do with your milk carton. When you have your milk carton done, what you're going to be doing is cutting out little sheets of paper. And I've actually, you can see that I've put a line here on the, I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to see if I put a line here on the paper. So it's 7 inches this way. So it's about 7 inches. And I'm going to, and what I do is I cut it out. I'll just show you. This is going to be the length of the tube, the 7 inches. And I take this one piece of paper. It's way too big to make a tube, so I usually cut it into about 3 pieces. So I can make 3 tubes. So essentially you want a piece of paper that's definitely 7 inches long, and it could be anywhere from 6 to 10 inches wide. It's not crucial how wide it is. You're just going to roll it up into a tube. You take your nicely cut out little piece, make sure you're rolling up the 7-inch side. Take your pencil. This is the perfect width for a mason bee tube. And then you just roll the paper around the pencil. Hope you can see. Beautiful tube. Slightly loosen it so you can get out the pencil. And then just take your tape and tape it up. Whoops. I put about 3 pieces of tape on. It doesn't have to be super hard, grade A construction quality. It just has to be a decent little tube. And sometimes I will just trim the end to make it nice and straight so that little wings don't get caught on anything. And then you got a beautiful tube. It's exactly the right width, and you can pop it into your milk carton, and it's exactly the right shape. Now you have to do I find that a milk carton takes about 40 to 50 of these. So it's something you do on a nice spring evening when you have the kids and grandkids over and you all do 10 each or something, and you will fill it up. You can, if you're lazy, which as I am, you can actually buy the tubes at a place like Buckerfield's or almost any garden center like Art Naps or whatever, they will sell the tubes for you. They're blocked at the back, and they're made of cardboard. They're quite stiff. And then you can pop them in your milk carton or in your own little tube. So are there any questions? I'll look in the chat to see if there's any questions here. So 7 inches long for the tube. And I make the paper about 8, anywhere between 6 to 8 inches. So you can roll it up. And yes, you need probably about 40 tubes to fill your milk carton. Yeah, so this is what you get. And when you install your mason bee home, as I say, keep it so that it doesn't get the afternoon sun. But it's really fun to watch. You can just stand there any day in April or May and watch those mason bees fly in and out of those tubes. And you know, she always comes carrying a huge ball of pollen with her. She dumps it off. And most female mason bees fill in about maybe 3 or 4 tubes in their lifetime. So if you have 40 tubes in your milk carton and half of them get filled up, don't feel bad. That means like there was probably 6 or 7 mason bees working hard in your garden. You can be really creative and make a variety of homes. You can make really beautiful mason bee homes. I've seen, you know, stunningly gorgeous ones. You can also, as I say, purchase tubes, and you can purchase houses commercially as well. But you have to be really very wary of commercial insect homes. Here's an example of one that you can buy in places like, you know, fancy nurseries and things like that, and they're terrible. Like there's no way any self-respecting insect can go. For one thing, this is only 2.5 inches wide, which may be enough if it was a very tiny little insect. But look how big the holes are. Like they're huge. They're like mason bee size. So these are really, really badly designed. So be very careful if you do go buy homes in insect homes in a nursery. I just like to acknowledge all these photographs are from bee people, a lot of them from Dr. Lalonde, who's a UBC biologist, some of my research assistant students, Fabian Sid and Finkara McCune, and Emily McMillan. A lot of these are Creative Commons images, yay for Creative Commons, and also the Pollination Ecology Lab at SFU. And this is my grandson, these photographs. He helps me look after my mason bees. It's a great project to do with kids. I mean, they're non-stinging bees. They get to learn about not to be scared of insects. I think one of the reasons 75% of the insects have disappeared from the Northern Hemisphere, flying insects, is that people are afraid of them. People kill insects all the time. So I try to teach the young people in my life to cherish insects and to look after them, to be insect protectors. And raising mason bees is a wonderful way of getting them to like insects and think they're kind of wonderful. So that's I'm going to put in the chat a mason bee fact sheet for you. It'll have all these directions that I've told you about how to make the tubes, how to make the houses, and also it will give you the tips about how you actually look after your mason bees. So I'll put that link in the chat. Yeah. Are there any questions? So lots of them. Great.
Yes, I think there's lots of questions. Can you see them, Nancy?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah. So how do you go about cleaning the bee cocoons if you have a reusable home? Let me go to the top, make sure I get all of them. Yeah. Should you change the tubes? So I do change my tubes every year, just because I'm very conscious that there are so many parasites and diseases in the bee population out in the wild now that didn't used to be there. So I do put brand new ones in every year just to try to minimize the fungus and the mites and those kinds of things that collect. Obviously, before humans came around and made mason bee homes for them, you know, mason bees would use the same similar holes they would find all the time. But I always keep in mind that things have changed. Things are not the way they used to be. And there are way more diseases for bees now. So yeah. How do you go out clean the bee cocoons in the winter? That handout, which I'm going to put in the chat for you, will tell you how to do it. But it's just use a tiny, tiny drop or two of bleach in some water. You rip open the tubes, you could just take your thumb and you kind of pop the little cocoons out. They drop in the water. You give them a little bleach wash. And then if you remember that picture with my grandson, I put them on paper towels to dry out. And once they're all dried out, I pop them in a yogurt container and some paper towel with some holes popped in the top, because remember, they're living creatures. They need air still. And I put them in the refrigerator. Yeah, that's about storing the cocoons. And when did the new bees emerge? Well, that's a really good question. I was just telling Jen yesterday that I was in the kitchen on Monday and my dog was barking at the floor. And I looked at the floor and it was a mason bee. It was crawling on my kitchen floor. It had flown out of my fridge. It had actually hatched in my fridge, which is ridiculous. It shouldn't be doing that. So they're already hatching. I've put them outside because I don't want them in my fridge because my family gets freaked out. So I put them outside, but it's not good. It's really not good. I mean, you shouldn't put them outside until the first blooms start coming, whether it's, you know, apricot blooms or pussy willows or something, anything that's blooming. There's nothing blooming right now. So I'm a little worried that they're hatching too early. And I think this is just part of that biological clock that's really been screwed up by climate change. So that's a problem. But usually it's mid-March is when you kind of aim to have them outside. So those little beans on the paper towels are actually the cocoons, and the larvae are inside them. And the larvae in the cocoon will develop into a full-grown mason bee by March, end of February. Usually they're full bees. So yeah, so I'll just repeat it again, that the female lays the egg hatches and becomes a larva, and the larva eats the pollen that the mother has provisioned for it. And then the larva, once it eats all the pollen, forms a cocoon around itself. And just like in a butterfly, the metamorphosis of the larva into the bee happens within the cocoon. And so that, the cocoon is ready to be washed in storage by October. And that's what I usually put them in the fridge. It's in October. I'm looking for a fun project for children to make the Lake Country Library this summer because they'll miss the mason bee seasons. Yeah, it's true. It's a bit late for mason bees in the summer. So we usually, what I do with kids in summer is talk to them about mining bees, because mining bees, Jen showed you the little tunnels that they make. So I often get the kids to look for mason bee holes in the lawns, except they're often in lawns and schoolyards, in fact. And I get them to make little signs that say, mining bees live here, or bees live here, so people don't dig them up. That's one project to do. Another great project to do with kids in the summer is Bumble Bee Watching. And finding, there's a wonderful app or a program called Bumble Bee Watch. And what you can do is you can take photographs of bumblebees and send them in to Bumble Bee Watch, and they will tell you what kind of species of bumblebee it is. So that's kind of fun to do as well. Yeah. It's suitable for children. I've got, I'm part of a research project called Border Free Bees, and we've created a teacher's guide for teachers to do things with kids about bees, native bees in particular. And that's on the website that I'm going to send you the link to the Mason Bee Home fact sheet. On that same website, if you go one back, to our resources on border-free bees, you'll find the teacher's guide, and it has lots of great projects to do with kids. Do you have to take the cocoons inside for winter? You don't have to. Again, in the natural world, because mason bees are native here, they can survive the winter outside. But again, if you're looking after, if what you're trying to do is help bees, I bring them inside, because that way it reduces the chance that they will be attacked by mites, attacked by parasitic wasps, and they're also really tasty for things like woodpeckers. So in order to give mason bees a little hand up, a little help, I bring mine in. Actually, I bring them in June, and I keep them in a closet all summer. Again, you should see my poor family. I had insects and bees, larvae, and everything in my house all the time. I keep them in a closet, and then I clean them out in October and put them in the fridge. And the bleach solution strength, I can't remember. I'm going to go I'm going to get the mason bee fact sheet here. And maybe I can share this screen. So this is the mason bee fact sheet, and I'll put the link here. So it tells you how to make the house and whether and how to place it and the nesting material, like the mud. It gives you the life cycle of the mason bee here and all the things I've just been talking about. And then, yeah, here it doesn't say much, just a drop of bleach with water. So I think it's like half a teaspoon to a liter, like it's just a tiny amount of bleach in it. And I will just take a copy of this and I will put it in the chat. Yeah, and I don't put new tubes out in June. I bring the tubes that I could be making today. I think I'm gonna put mason bee house out today because my eggs are hatching. So I let them fill up, and then when I stop seeing new plugs, when I stop seeing tubes being filled up, usually end of May, I take the whole house and I just bring it in my house. And I just bring the house in for the whole season. And this really cuts down on the number of parasites and mites that the bees experience, suffer from. How's everybody's tube rolling and house making going? I always think mason bees are a great project for school kids because you do all this work in March. You get to watch them until the end of May. School's out. You don't have to do anything all summer. And then in the fall, when you're back in school again, you wash your bees and store them. Bumblebees and mason bees are great bees for studying with kids. So that's it for me.
Well, this has been fabulous. So my question to you, Nancy, is how do you know if you have any mason bees? If you put out your house, will some come? I mean, I'm not even sure I have any around.
You should. They will come. They actually will come. You can actually buy them too. You can buy the cocoons. You can go to Buckerfield's or Art Naps and you can buy, say, 10 starter cocoons, right?
Good.
Or you can order them from West Coast Seeds too. I find that they're really good, the West Coast Seed ones. You can order a little starter box of 10 cocoons and then you can just grow. Like I started with 10 cocoons from Buckerfield's a few years ago, and now I get like 50, 60, 80 cocoons every year. So
wow. Okay. Well, that's great to know that I have a backup plan.
That's right. And they are native. So they're looking, if you have lots of flowers in your backyard in this early to late spring, you will have mason bees. And they love fruit trees. Like they're superb fruit tree pollinators.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, this has been really fabulous. I want to thank both you and Jen for getting us all excited about building mason bee houses And this is obviously a perfect time of year to be doing this and getting our houses ready and outside for these bees. So I do, on behalf of everyone who joined us, thank you very much. And for those of you who joined us, if you're interested in this topic, you might come back and join us again on March 24th, when we have another Mason Bee session with Nancy. And I think, Jen, you're joining us as well for this session. And we're going to talk about, I think, about how you can make a garden that's friendly for Mason bees. And so, so I hope you'll be able to join us then as well. So once again, thank you for everyone for joining us, and a special thanks to you, Nancy and Jen, for leading this great session on Mason bees. We'll all promise to do our part. Thank you very much.
There's another question in the chat. Let me just,
is there?
I'll just respond to it. Someone said that when you buy the little tubes in the box, I think this is what it's referring to. Do you drop the cocoons into the tubes? No, you don't. You just put them in the garden, say in a little shelter, like make a little yogurt container or something, and without the lid on it, and just put the cocoons in the yogurt container or a little box or something where the bees can get out, and they will hatch and start flying around. They will find your tubes. They will find your tubes. Yeah, you don't have to do it. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds even better. They know what to do.
They know what to do. They'll find those tubes themselves. Yeah. And our next talk is about not just Mason bees, but all bees. So how do you make gardens for all bees? Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to that too. So thank you once again, and we'll see you both on March 24th. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.